This morning, police out in force in Melbourne trying to prevent a repeat of yesterday's violence outside the construction union headquarters. A children's buddy bubble easing the isolation of lockdown in New South Wales over the school holidays. Pfizer reports great results for vaccinating children aged 5 to 11, a key step to protecting youngsters from the Delta variant. And the Prime Minister lands in New York. Key talks ahead with world leaders as he tries to calm troubled waters over the submarine deal.
This is 7 News with Ann Sanders.
Good morning. There's a tense standoff on the streets of Melbourne this morning as hundreds of police face off against protesters angry at the impact of Victoria's lockdown and calls for mandatory vaccinations. Paul Dowsley is there. Paul, good morning to you. Police are trying to protect the headquarters of the main construction union, the CFMEU.
And they have been doing that for an hour and a half, keeping this group from the union headquarters, which is just around the corner. Then in the past 2 minutes, the crowd, which had been stationary, has now moved, and they are moving up Victoria Street. You can hear that cheer. Flares have been let off as this crowd is marching towards what I suspect is State Parliament, which is probably a 15-minute walk away. A lot of their anger today has turned from being at the union to being at the state government, which last night announced that the entire construction industry will be shut down for 2 weeks. The catalyst was protests yesterday where the front doors and signage of the union building was smashed, and the union chief, John Setka, had items thrown at him, bottles and other objects thrown at him. The government acted swiftly last night about 10 p.m. to shut their industry down. So that's about 300,000 workers, Anne, out of work for at least 2 weeks. And this is their reaction, the reaction of a few hundred here today. It's a big industry. A lot of people very upset in the bigger picture of the industry about how this has panned out, and these would be the most angry. Whether they're all union members, it's impossible to know. The chief of the union, John Setka, accuses this group of being infiltrated by troublemakers. Anne?
Now, Paul, a big surge forward there by the protesters. What's the distance between them and the barrage of police on the other side?
Well, the police have now been left behind. Police are nowhere to be seen except blocking traffic here so that this group can move through. The large body of police, the riot squad and others, the mounted branch, are now left back behind the corner here to the right of where Rick is showing you now. There's no sign of police coming up from behind. Police will be obviously coordinating now to make sure that they're in control of the front of this. I understand that there are officers, a lot of officers already up at State Parliament. The presumption was no doubt that this was going to be their likely target.
All right, we're going to go to Nathan Templeton. Nathan, we can see the riot police there running along the streets.
And a lot of movement here at the CFMEU headquarters where the majority of police had stationed themselves. You can probably see there the mounted branch are now heading into that intersection of Elizabeth and Victoria Street. They will turn left and attempt to get up ahead of the protesters to have greater numbers at Parliament, where we assume the protesters are heading. And as we just pan across to the right here, this will give you an idea of the police presence that turned out here today. It was enormous. At least 300 of uniformed officers. We had the riot police here at the front who we've just seen run up the street. They'll also be going to their vehicles trying to race down to Parliament to get in ahead of the protesters. There was 20 police horses here with the mounted squad. So as you can see, police are making their move. They don't believe that the CFMEU headquarters where we are is the target any longer. Certainly Union boss John Setka is not here. So all these police will head to buses and minivans and race up to the top of the city, Spring Street, the top of the CBD, and try to get there ahead of the protesters who look like they're going to set up camp there to vent their anger at Premier Daniel Andrews and the state government.
Nathan, the police we saw there seemed to be just, they were rushing towards where the protesters are going. But what are the others armed with? We saw shields, batons. What do they have to protect themselves?
The riot police have large plastic shields, helmets with full face masks, but they also have those pretty intimidating looking guns that fire rubber bullets, and some of them were dispersed yesterday. What you can see now is the back of all those police heading down towards the intersection. I guess they're checking whether there's any secondary or splinter protest group, just making sure this main asset that they're protecting, the CFMEU headquarters, is safe, and it does look like it is. So those police will now basically march up Victoria Street to the top of the city and try to get in ahead of the protesters as they head towards Parliament. So enormous police presence. Clearly they were trying to intimidate the protesters and talk them out of taking any violent action here at headquarters. But unfortunately now there's a new battleground, and that is Spring Street.
All right, returning to Paul Darsley now. Thank you very much, Nathan, who's with the protesters. Paul, how angry are they? What are they chanting? What's the mood like there on the ground? Obviously very angry.
Oh! Hey!
Oh! All right, so they're clearly getting extremely violent there. I hope that Paul's okay. We'll return to Nathan Templeton. Nathan, I don't know if you saw that, but the protesters are starting some violence there. Somebody was tackled. They set off flares. They're marching. They're angry. You know, this is an appalling situation on the streets in the centre of Melbourne.
They're pretty confronting scenes, and when you think about what this is about, it's about construction workers who have been allowed to work all the way through the pandemic being told that they need to get vaccinated in order to keep working, when there's millions of people right across Australia who have been out of work, who have lost homes and businesses because of this. This looks like wartime type scenes. It's actually quite ridiculous if it wasn't so serious. There's choppers overhead, there's riot police who are armed. Yesterday the scenes here at the CFMEU were extremely violent. There were bottles and crates thrown at the union leader John Setka, who was pleading with the crowd to actually calm down and just try to listen to his message. An important part of this story is exactly who the protesters are. John Setka's been very vocal in the last 12 hours in saying that the majority of the protesters from yesterday, and we assume it's a similar group today, are not actually union members. They are professional protesters, agitators who are against lockdowns, they're against vaccinations, they're against the state government. Some of them are just angry men who are not sure what they're frustrated about, but they're just looking for some action and looking for some trouble and basically trying to start a fight. There was heavy drinking here yesterday afternoon, which no doubt fueled some of the violence. Unfortunately, it looks like they are intent on causing trouble regardless of what their actual cause is, Anne, and I fear as we see, you know, police cars speeding through the city here, this is all getting pretty nasty and pretty serious, and you would have to think that there is going to be some sort of injuries as these clashes happen in the top of the city today. Unfortunately also, it's of course not about the media, but a lot of these protesters do see the mainstream media as enemies, as another highway patrol vehicle speeds down Elizabeth Street trying to get through the intersection and trying to get up to Spring Street and Parliament as quickly as they can.
On that point, let's go back to Paul Darsley. Paul, I'm concerned to know how you're doing. The protesters are very violent. Are you okay?
Yeah, there was a group there who certainly targeted us a few minutes ago, who were standing on a seat there trying to get an elevated view as the protest group walked past. A few in that crowd had it in for mainstream media. As I'm not sure what you saw on screen, Anne, but a man came from the side, grabbed me around the neck, and others then joined in a scuffle. I'm not sure if they were maybe trying to protect me or to join in and have a go at me, I'm not sure. But the outcome of that was us, both Rick, my cameraman colleague here, and myself, now being covered in what I believe is urine. I believe that this has been thrown, it got it in my mouth, It's all over me. And a couple of protesters, I will note, a couple of protesters in the minutes after stopped, came back to me and said, "I hope you're okay. That is not what we are about. That should not have happened." That they were absolutely abhorred by it, as am I, Anne.
Oh, look, Paul, that is just appalling. I can't believe that you're telling me that this morning. And I think all of Australia will be thinking the same thing. That is...
Anne, I was just going to cut in there because police, I was talking to you earlier about there not being police here, but they are now coming down in a line across Swanston Street. They are still a few minutes now behind the back of the protest group, which is further down the road here. But police are certainly moving in to try and, I guess, bring up the rear and control that group.
All right, Paul, please take care while you're out there. You're doing a fantastic job reporting for us, but do be very careful, please.
Thank you.
Paul, there seemed to be a mixed bunch there with the protesters. You've got those who are generally protesting against the construction industry being shut down, those who are protesting against vaccinations being compulsory, and then you've got this rebel element that you came face to face with.
Excuse me, Anne. Yes, and it is, and that's what the union boss, John Setka, has said, that he feels that the group has been infiltrated, that there may well be, he said only a small percentage were union members, but he said that it's been infiltrated by police, by people who are just here to agitate. And there have certainly been people at protests, and I've covered them over the past few weeks, where there are people who are stressing that they are there with a real message about the vaccine and about their health concerns and lockdowns, and then there are some that seem hell-bent on causing trouble. And I certainly met one of them this morning who, for no reason, I've never met him. I'm just a journalist doing my job. I'm doing my very best to tell you the facts as they're presented to me and as I see them. I'm happy to give both sides of any story. I'm desperate to. That's my job. It's how I sleep well at night, by presenting both sides accurately and fairly. But he singled me out without knowing anything about me, just, I suggest, because he saw this. And the end result is that Rick, my colleague here, and myself are covered in what I understand to be urine.
Yeah, well, that's a shocking situation. Now, Paul, where do you think these protesters are heading now? They're still surging down the streets in the city there.
Yeah, we sought some refuge in the minutes afterwards, so I'm not sure where they're heading. We have other colleagues who are further along, and I can only imagine they are either going to Flinders Street train station, which is straight down this road, or to Parliament House, which would make more sense, because their fury today has very much been at the state government and the Premier.
All right, let's go back to Nathan Templeton. Nathan, what's the situation with the police and the protesters where you are?
Yeah, the police have all left this scene now in quite a rush, because they were buses here to try to get them back up to Spring Street as quickly as they possibly could. I just wanted to pick up on Paul's point there, and I know this is not about us, the media, but I'm yet to speak to one of these protesters who can actually articulate what they mean when they say fake news. TV reporters talk to the pictures that they see. The camera doesn't lie. The vision is not doctored. There's no conspiracy theory. We're not for government or against government. And so these mindless people who just come up and just rattled off this phrase, fake news, I've yet to hear anyone explain to me exactly what they mean about that. We're just taking vision of what is happening in front of us. We're reporting what the police tell us. We're reporting the union side of it. And we will talk to anyone who's prepared to calmly try to articulate their point. So turning on the media certainly doesn't help their cause, because all it does is show the viewers, the millions of people watching, exactly how these people are behaving, and the fact that they aren't able to make their point clearly and tell us what it is they want. Hopefully Paul and his cameramen are okay there. We do have crews up at the top end of town at Spring Street. We must say also it was a very strong, decisive move by Daniel Andrews last night to shut down the construction industry for 2 weeks. That is going to have huge ramifications. It's going to cost the industry about $1 billion a week. There's no guarantee. The state government was keen to that it wasn't just yesterday's riot that caused the shutdown, but you would have to say that was clearly the tipping point that caused that strong action from Daniel Andrews. The question then, of course, was whether that strong action would backfire, whether it would provoke and inflame the situation. Clearly, from today's showing, it has provoked a lot more action and there is serious anger among them. So the Premier probably needs to just hold his ground now and keep it shut down. It's important to note John Setka absolutely condemns this type of action. He says that is not representative of the union. So on that front, you'd have to say he's not going to get behind these protesters and push back against the shutdown of the construction industry, because he doesn't have a leg to stand on when they behave like this. Also should be noted that yesterday the action started at about midday and it was still going at almost 6 o'clock. So it lasted 6 hours today. Publicly, the protest group said that they would start at 10 a.m. So sadly, I reckon it's only just getting started, because they don't have jobs to go to at the moment. They're pretty committed to their cause of causing as much chaos and noise to try to get their message across today. So this could last for hours and hours. That's going to stretch police resources. And the longer it goes on and as the volatility grows, the greater chance there is that there's going to be violence and unfortunately injuries like we saw yesterday.
Well, we saw John Setka came out yesterday. Any sign of him today? Any sign indeed of Dan Andrews or anyone from the government coming out in response to what's happening on the streets of the city of Melbourne this morning?
Well, as this morning, John Setka was very vocal. He did the rounds of media. He spoke to Sunrise. He's done a lot of talkback radio. He was very strong in condemning the protesters from yesterday. Daniel Andrews was not due to speak at today's COVID media conference, but the actions of today may mean that he does call a media conference late in the day. Also, police normally give a media update late in the day once things calm down. But look, their immediate concern will be actually containing and controlling this angry mob and stopping them from causing injury and any sort of destruction around the city. But John Setka couldn't have been clearer. If he was to turn up at today's protest, that would surely inflame the situation. So I'm sure that he's been advised not to do that. He was very clear on radio this morning saying he's not scared, he's not intimidated, he's faced this sort of stuff before. But I think if wiser heads prevail, he wouldn't show up and put himself in front of this mob, because that is what incited the violence yesterday. I strongly doubt that Daniel Andrews will put himself in front of that crowd, given the vitriol and the angry chanting that's been directed towards him today as well. But no doubt he will somehow communicate his message from the government today.
All right, thanks very much, Nathan. Paul Dowsley's on the move with the protesters. Paul, where are you now?
We're right at the intersection of Russell and Latrobe Streets now, Anne. We have run from where we last spoke with you a couple of blocks away, and we do now have this view of across the hill here, down Latrobe Street in the centre of town, the back end of this group of protesters snaking their way towards what must be State Parliament House. And at the rate they are walking now, I imagine it is maybe another 5 to 10 minute walk for them to get to the steps, which is where I expect that there is a large line of police already there. I'm told they've been there since this morning. And this line of police that you're seeing here in the foreground with me, just bringing up the back to make sure that they can't come back if they suddenly decide to change tack and head another direction if they're blocked off from getting to State Parliament House.
So tactically, what are the police doing? They're just trying to protect the streets? Are they surging towards the protesters? Paint us a picture about where you are in the city, where the police are and where the protesters are.
Yeah, we're right in the middle of the city, Anne. So this is, I guess, the top end, a State Parliament House just around the corner, and there are police at each end, I guess, ahead of them and behind them. I expect that this group will be allowed, if you like, to gather at State Parliament House. It would be virtually impossible for police to stop them unless they blocked a road. But the way the Melbourne city grid is, with square roads, they just go down another road and probably still be able to get to State Parliament. So I expect this group will gather there. Then it's up to police just how long they let them gather, how long until they move in and try and disperse this crowd. Because no surprise to any Victorians, A group like this is illegal under the Chief Health Officer's guidelines. They did it yesterday, though, at the headquarters of the union, Anne. It was 7 hours there before police moved in. Police let that gathering go for 7 hours. It grew from only a dozen to being several hundred, probably 400 or 500. And again, they've got a group here, but they've come in a lot harder today. But they have allowed them to walk through the streets. And I expect that shortly they will be getting to Parliament, and I'm going to try and do the same.
All right, Paul, who's in State Parliament? People working there today? Have they reinforced it with extra police? What will they be heading towards when they get there?
Well, Rick, I'm just speaking with my colleague here. We're going to keep on walking, Anne. But yeah, there would be still some people working at State Parliament, but it is an office. And so like most offices in Melbourne, they are down to pretty much no one. Most people are working from home. But of course, it's just symbolic. I don't expect that they think they're going to see anyone actually working there at State Parliament. But it's more just as a symbol of their fury at their industry being shut down for 2 weeks, which happened late last night. Given these guys and girls start work very early as construction workers, I expect that a lot of them, in fact, woke up to the news this morning that they didn't have a job to go to for a couple of weeks. I'm just on the road here behind the police lines ahead of us, so this traffic is moving again, Anne. But I'm just saying that a lot of these guys would have, I suspect, woken this morning to the news that they don't have a job to go to for at least 2 weeks. So that fury would have been immense for a lot of them. And then to hear that there was a protest organised here at 10 with nothing else to do, several hundred have turned up here.
All right, Paul Dowsley, Nathan Templeton, live on the streets of Melbourne. This situation is unfolding. You're watching a special edition of 7's Morning News. We'll take a short break and return to the scene of Melbourne shortly. Welcome back. There's a tense standoff on the streets of Melbourne this morning as hundreds of police face off against protesters angry at the impact of Victoria's lockdown and calls for mandatory vaccinations. Reporter Paul Dowsley is there in the thick of it for us. Paul, where are the protesters now?
I understand they are pretty much getting to State Parliament now. We've been held up for a few minutes earlier, and for those viewers who just joined us, we were both, my colleague Rick and I, live on air with you a short time ago when I was grabbed around the neck by a protester. Another protester then squeezed, and I saw him do this. Didn't realise what was happening quite at the time, but he squeezed a bottle of water, a plastic bottle of water, towards Rick and myself, and within a few seconds I realised that we'd both been covered in urine by one of these protesters. Extremely unpleasant, and so we've been held up a bit, and the group is now a few blocks from us this way towards Parliament House, Anne.
Paul, that violent and intimidating incident with you and your cameraman Rick just a short time ago, did anybody come to your aid? Did anybody push those protesters off you? Or basically did they, what happened exactly? Yeah, look, to put it lightly, Anne, I'm not a fighter. I've never swung a punch in my life. So in that situation, I've always figured I'll be quick on my feet to make a move. But that fellow came in from the side very, very quickly, and clearly I'm quite exposed live on air. So I did my best to get myself out of that, what felt like a headlock. And my colleague Rick, who was standing on a seat trying to get an elevated shot, he jumped down with his camera, came to my assistance. Some other people did come in and try and break that up, so they did try to defuse it. And I will give credit to a few protesters who stopped in the minutes after to check that we were okay. One made a point of telling me that that was not what they were about. He was disgusted by any attack like that on media. As I say, I'm more than happy to hear your views. I'm more than happy to talk to you about what your feelings are. I want to talk to you about them. I want to represent what your views are. But in this case, I wasn't given that opportunity to speak in a civil way with that man. He certainly did not behave in a civil way with me. All right, Paul, take it easy there. Let's go to Nathan Templeton, who's with the police. Nathan, anything happening there with you at the moment?
Well, Nathan, I'm Nathan, and just recapping what has actually happened this morning, it was made very public that this latest protest was going to start at 10 a.m. At around 9:30, a huge police presence was on the scene here, just outside CFMEU headquarters, just bringing everyone up to speed. If they haven't been watching for the last couple of hours, there would have been at least 300 or 400 police, including the riot squad, who have their guns with rubber bullets, shields, face masks, the works. There was 20 mounted police and at least 200 or 300 uniform officers. In the end, the protest group, who claim to be CFMEU union members, but according to the CFMEU, many of them are not. They are just professional protesters and troublemakers. They assembled on the other side of Victoria Street. This is a very busy intersection in Melbourne CBD, just across from the Victoria Market. It was about at least half an hour, probably 45 minutes. The two groups were faced off against each other. The no man's land area between the two got smaller and smaller. Police on their megaphone told the protesters that if they didn't start to disperse or to move back, that they would start to advance on the protesters. In the end, that show of force caused the protesters to turn on their heels. They've gone up Victoria Street towards the top of the CBD, and we assume they are heading to State Parliament, which is on Spring Street at the top end of the city. So you can see a chopper shot there. There's still, that group continues to grow. The protesters probably numbered around 500 when they actually left here, and they are heading towards Parliament to vent their anger at the Premier Daniel Andrews for shutting down construction for 2 weeks.
All right, Nathan, we're going to leave it there for now. And Paul, thank you very much to both of you. That tense standoff continues in Melbourne. We will take you back there shortly. But now to some other news of the day. The northern New South Wales Shire of Byron Bay is being plunged back into lockdown. Overnight, there were 1,022 new cases and, sadly, 10 deaths. Amelia Brace is live in Sydney for us. Amelia, good morning to you. There are low levels of vaccination in the Byron Shire, which is an increasing concern.
Yeah, absolutely. And only about a third of residents in that Byron area are fully vaccinated, which is well behind the rest of the state. And now exactly what authorities feared would happen has happened. And that area has been exposed by a COVID positive person who travelled from Sydney to Ballina on Saturday. Authorities say the person was infectious in the Byron, Ballina and Tweed areas over the weekend and yesterday. And as a result, there are now cases in Tweed, Byron Bay and Kempsey, forcing those areas into lockdown from 5 o'clock this afternoon.
It will be initially for 7 days and it'll be reviewed. Public Health will be out encouraging, obviously, testing. And I certainly, as Health Minister, encourage everybody in those areas to take this very seriously.
And Amelia, there's a new easing of restrictions allowing children to nominate a friendship group.
Yeah, that's right. And play dates are back just in time for the school holidays. This so-called Friends Bubble will allow 3 children under the age of 18 to come together, so long as they're all from the same council area or live within 5 k's of each other. Adults supervising those children will have to be vaccinated, though. And authorities this morning actually had a young girl at our daily press conference to speak about exactly what this change means to her.
Helping everyone feel connected will undoubtedly benefit their mental health in this time. And for children and young people, this will also be able to impact their studies, because I know from personal experience that there is a lot of lack of motivation regarding schooling due to lockdown and not being able to see our friends.
And of course, children and parents have endured weeks, months of at-home learning here in New South Wales, and it's hoped that this little reward or incentive will help tide them over until they can return to the classroom at the end of next month.
Yeah, for sure. Amelia Brace reporting. Thanks a lot, Amelia. Concern over that positive case in Byron Bay could see Queensland burst the border bubble for essential workers in northern New South Wales. Ben Murphy is in Brisbane. Good morning, Ben. Queensland has hit a vaccination milestone.
Morning, Anne. Yeah, 60% of Queenslanders have now had their first dose of vaccine, though Queensland is still last with Western Australia for the national race, with just under 42% of people having had their second dose. Queensland recorded no new local cases today, but the focus is squarely on the Byron Bay case and what implications that may have for the border bubble. This is the Premier speaking just before the announcement was made to lock down Byron, Tweed and Kempsey.
We'll listen to the advice from New South Wales, but we just need to be ready if New South Wales does anything in relation to that Byron Bay area. So please listen to updates from Queensland Health following the New South Wales press conference.
We've not heard yet from Queensland Health whether those LGAs will be locked out of the border bubble. Of course, we did see in the case of Lismore and Glen Innes, when they had positive cases, they were removed from the bubble. The bigger question might be here today whether the bubble will continue if you do see Byron and Tweed removed, given how crucial they are for that border community. Anne?
All right, Ben Murphy live in Brisbane. Thanks very much, Ben. We're going to take you now to some live chopper shots, dramatic scenes in the heart of Melbourne this morning as protesters surge in the city. They're heading towards State Parliament, protecting them. Hundreds of police facing off against the protesters. We have reporters on the scene. We'll take you back there live shortly. But there's been a major breakthrough in the battle to protect children from COVID. Pharmaceutical giant Pfizer declaring its vaccine is safe and effective for 5 to 11-year-olds. Live to Rob Scott in Canberra. Good morning, Rob. What does this all mean for the rollout in Australia?
Well, and hopefully it means that jabs for primary school age children aren't far off, which of course would be a huge relief for a lot of anxious parents. Overnight, Pfizer announced that its clinical trials in kids aged 5 to 11 have shown the vaccine is safe and that it works. As part of those trials, kids were given a much lower dose, a third of the amount that's in a regular shot. The results show that they developed antibody levels that are just as strong as teenagers. Pfizer says it'll now apply for emergency authorization in the United States with the aim of rolling the jab out to kids as young as 5 within weeks. Applications to European and to British regulators are expected to follow pretty quickly, which means Australia may not be far behind.
We had more people volunteering quickly than we could accommodate in the trial. So there's pent-up demand for parents to be able to have their children return to a normal life to reduce the risk of their child getting sick as well as transmitting to the family.
I think it's welcome news. I think that, you know, the people that I trust to analyse the data is our own TGA, our own Australian regulator, and of course they will be looking at that sort of data very closely before we make any decisions about under 12s.
Parents of children under 5 will have to wait a bit longer to get their kids vaccinated. Trials are still underway for kids in that age group, although we are expecting the results to come back before the end of the year.
All right, Rob Scott live in Canberra. Thank you very much. I don't know if there's been any reaction from Canberra to the scenes in Melbourne that are playing out across television screens today. Let's go back to Paul Darsley for the very latest. There's a zero tolerance approach by police to these protesters. You can see that they're standing guard at State Parliament. Paul's not with us at the moment, so let's go to Nathan Templeton. A hard line taken by police there this morning, Nathan.
Yeah, absolutely, and they are incredible images that we're seeing there. That actually looks like the day before the AFL Grand Final when thousands of fans flood into the top of the CBD there. It's difficult to get an estimate of the numbers, but when they were down here on the corner of Elizabeth and Victoria Street, we thought perhaps around 500 protesters, but that group seems to be growing and growing all the time. Basically what happened was that they had protests here at CFMEU headquarters yesterday where they targeted the union boss John Setka. It was publicised that they would have another protest at 10 o'clock this morning. There was a long standoff down here outside Victoria Market between the protest group and police. Both groups continued to grow as the morning wore on. It was a very, very strong showing from police, including the riot squad, the mounted branch, and at least 200 or 300 uniformed officers. The protest group on the other side of Victoria Street just kept growing, and every time those fluoro tops joined in, the mob would cheer. They were chanting that they want Daniel Andrews, the Premier, sacked. And here you can see that's a shot looking up Spring Street to the steps of Parliament. Flares have been let off. It's a pretty intimidating scene, and I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to say that it does look somewhat like a war zone, and all of this is over vaccinations. Paul Dowsley has been doing a wonderful job putting himself in the line of fire there with his cameraman, and I believe he is in position now up near the steps of Parliament.
All right, we'll go to Paul then. Paul, 320,000 hardworking members of the construction industry can't go to work today because of the actions of a few, and this certainly isn't going to make the situation any better. Paul is not available to talk to us right at the moment. He's moving with the protesters. So, Nathan, I'll bring you back in. Have you ever seen anything like this before on the streets of Melbourne?
No, look, it's incredibly violent. There have been big union protests over the years, but we haven't seen anything like this for quite some time. On the weekend just gone, on Saturday, there were major anti-lockdown protests, and they got very, very violent, and that was something of a forerunner to this, because there is a lot of angst and anger among people in Melbourne. We've been locked down more than any other city in the world. It's very important to note the CFMEU boss, John Setka, has been at pains to point out he believes the majority of the troublemakers from yesterday are not actually union members. They are what he calls professional protesters, so neo-Nazis, anti-lockdown, anti-vax, anti-government type people, some of them even dressed in tradie type apparel to try to pass themselves off as CFMEU workers. It's very difficult, basically impossible, to prove the exact makeup of such a big group, particularly amid all the chaos. Police are taking images, video and photographs to try to identify as many people as they can, but it is we'll never really know for sure exactly who is a union member and who is here basically just looking for a fight. But whatever the makeup of that crowd, this has got to a point where they are doing their cause, their so-called cause, no good at all. Their main gripe is that they are being forced to be vaccinated, or told that they have to be vaccinated if they want to continue to work in the construction industry. They are also angry about other COVID-safe measures that are on construction sites. Their anger really has turned from that lack of choice about vaccinations to directly at Daniel Andrews, because he took the unprecedented and very, very decisive and strong move last night to shut down all construction in lockdown zones in Victoria. So all of these people you see on screen don't have jobs to go to for at least 2 weeks. They are angry at the Premier. They want him sacked, Anne.
All right, thank you very much, Nathan. We'll bring in Paul Dowsley again. Paul, what do you think the sentiment is of people sitting at home in COVID lockdown, watching this play out on the beautiful streets of Melbourne?
Well, I guess no matter what side your politics sit on, Anne, it's very sad to see police horses now flanking the side of this protest, no doubt trying to get ahead of this protest group, which had been at State Parliament initially, Anne, at 10 a.m. They met downtown at the CFMEU union headquarters just before midday. We were speaking when they moved from there up to State Parliament. They got here, it seemed to me they were probably only here for about 15 minutes. Then maybe about 5 or 6 minutes ago, they've moved around and they're coming back now down Burke Street, heading into the very centre of our city, Anne. Sitting watching at home, you can only say this is very sad scenes in Melbourne.
Do you sense that that group of protesters is getting larger? Are more people joining them?
It's hard to tell. Sorry, mate. We're in a bike lane and there's cyclists coming past. Sorry, man. Sorry. It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell. It's certainly a larger group. We might be able to go up now. I wasn't wanting to go too close earlier. There weren't some people who were very angry. But we're now, this is towards the back of the group now. We might be able to look down the hill to get a sense of the size of the group. There are still some people coming in at the back, but not many. The main group now is down Burke Street. And sadly, the way the hill gradient works, you still actually can't get much of a sense. But maybe you can hear the fury in this group as they go through the city, trying to have their opinions heard, their fury heard. Take care, buddy. Take care, man. Thank you. Thank you.
What are they chanting,
The lady here is
Paul?
talking about the suicide that is being felt. There's a woman here talking about suicide and the number of suicide that's happening in the industry and across the wider community. She's talking about mental health.
All right,
I'm sorry, that question you said, Anne?
There's general concern then about the COVID lockdown across the city, and I guess there's a lot of pent-up anger and frustration from people, as is happening right around the world because of the situation that we find ourselves in, people being locked in their homes for such a long time. What are the protesters on the streets there chanting out today?
Most of them, Anne, I can't repeat on television, but one that I can is sack Dan Andrews. So that was very much the feeling this morning at the union headquarters. It seemed odd to me that they were at the union headquarters when that fury was really at. My apologies for that. My apologies for that. The target of their fury, though, is up the hill here at State Parliament, and that's where they were for maybe 15 minutes. And where they are heading now, you can see down the hill here again. The group is going down Burke Street again. Apologies for the language there, folks, if you heard it, and apologies for the language you might be seeing on screen. But they're heading straight down the street. It seems no sense, Anne, that they are breaking up or dispersing.
Yeah, as we can see and hear, a lot of anger on the streets of Melbourne. Very tense situation there between protesters and police. We'll leave it there. We'll take a break and we'll return with you very shortly. You're watching 7 News. Prime Minister Morrison is in New York today for high-level talks with world leaders. His first meeting is with US President Biden, but before that he addressed the diplomatic storm over the cancellation of a contract with France for building submarines. David Woywood is in New York City.
Good morning. Well, stepping off his RAAF flight here in New York City today, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison walking headfirst into a growing diplomatic storm. His visit timed as French anger over his decision to scrap a multi-billion-dollar defence contract with the EU powerhouse hit a crescendo, the PM declaring national security concerns were behind the shock move that blindsided French officials.
It would be naive to think that a decision of this nature was not going to cause disappointment, obviously, to the French. We understand that. We totally acknowledge that.
Still, France's European allies declaring Australia's pivot can't be ignored as the future of an EU-Australian trade deal now hangs in the balance. French fury trying to delay that agreement.
One of our member states has been treated in a way that is not acceptable. So we want to know what happened and why, and therefore you first of all clarify that before you keep on going with business as usual.
At the end of the day, you have to do things that are in Australia's national interests and our security interests.
The PM, though, looking ahead to tomorrow's one-on-one meeting with US President Joe Biden, their first bilateral since either took office. French fallout on the agenda, so too climate change, COVID-19 and the upcoming Quad dialogue with Japan and India joining. A jam-packed agenda that now threatens to be overshadowed by frayed French relations.
Police have renewed their appeal for information over a house fire that claimed the life of a 14-year-old boy. The teenager's body was found in an upstairs bedroom after the fire was extinguished in the Western Sydney suburb of Macquarie Fields. Natasha Squarey reports.
Well, there's no doubt this deadly blaze was deliberately lit, but 3 months on, detectives are still hunting for a suspect, and they believe young children here in Macquarie Fields know what happened, but might be too scared to tell the truth. The fire ripped through the townhouse in June. The resident and her 6 children managed to escape, but 14-year-old Tama Tira Jones, who'd snuck in for a sleepover, was trapped by flames. His body was discovered under a bed on the 2nd level. Investigators now believe at least one person went to the back of the property on Montana Way and started the fire on the back deck.
We believe there are a number of people, especially youths in the area, that may be able to assist, and we really need them to come forward.
Tama's grandmother says her family deserves answers and justice.
He was the most happiest child ever. Everyone around here can remember his smile, his walk, how the child was. was beautiful.
A memorial has now been set up outside the home where the teen lost his life. Detectives want to hear from anyone who may have been driving through Macquarie Fields on June 30.
Thanks very much, Tash. Let's go to finance news now, and share markets around the world have taken a beating over the past day. To Network Finance Editor Gemma Acton. Good morning, Gemma. What's caused this sell-off?
Good morning, Anne. Well, nerves have been on edge for some weeks now, with investors realising that coronavirus is likely to be with us for much longer than originally believed. And so they're becoming increasingly uneasy about the global economic recovery. In the past week, though, jitters have increased as a major Chinese property developer, Evergrande, has been teetering on the brink of collapse. The company owes more than 400 billion Australian dollars, and there are fears that if it does go under, it could trigger major problems throughout China's real estate and banking industry. Chinese markets were closed yesterday, but Wall Street put in its worst one-day performance since October. And given that backdrop, it is somewhat surprising that the ASX 200 is holding up as well as it is. Yes, it is lower, but only by a handful of points, and we've seen it's just turned around now. The Aussie dollar is also climbing again, but still well short of 73 US cents. Anne.
Gemma Acton reporting. Thank you very much, Gemma. Well, this is Melbourne from our helicopter as a rally moves from the headquarters of the CFMEU to Parliament House. Dramatic scenes there as thousands or hundreds of protesters, difficult to know the exact number, head towards State Parliament to be greeted by hundreds of police. But up next, Pat Welsh will be back with sport right after the break.
Welcome back. AFL Grand Final preparations continue to ramp up with the 3 umpires for Saturday's match to be announced shortly. Melbourne forward Charlie Spargo was on light duties after suffering a jarred ankle, but the D's remain confident he will be fit to take on the Dogs. Luke Beveridge will have some tough calls at the selection table with at least 2 possible changes. And Michael Voss is firming as Carlton's next coach after Alistair Clarkson knocked back a Godfather offer from new Blues CEO Brian Cook. In the NRL, the Dally M medal race is down to 5 players. Panthers halfback Nathan Cleary leads the count after 19 of 25 rounds. Manly superstar Tom Trbojevic is second and remains the red-hot favourite after his sizzling finish to the regular season.
The last couple of years haven't been the most ideal for myself on the injury front, and there has been many challenges, but I've got a lot of people that are in my corner.
Sea Eagles captain Daly Cherry Evans, Rabbitohs playmaker Cody Walker and Roosters skipper James Tedesco round out the 5. The winner will be named on the second night of the ceremony next Monday. The Australian women's cricket team are chasing a record-extending 25th straight international win in their first one-day international against India and Mackay. Star all-rounder Elise Perry was wayward with the ball, conceding 26 runs off her first 2 overs. In her second game, 18-year-old Darcy Brown struck twice early to pick up her first one-day international wickets.
In the air, out! Oh, Rachel Haynes, you can do it all!
Brown took her third wicket to reduce India to 3 for 115. $15 million sprint race, the Everest, is set to be Sydney's first major sporting event with crowds post-lockdown. 5,000 fans will be able to attend the world's richest race on turf at Randwick on October 16, as long as 70% of New South Wales residents are double vaccinated. The state government knocked back an application to allow 15,000 fans on track. And Anne, that is the latest in sport.
All right, thanks very much, Paddy. You're watching Seven's Morning News on a very tense and dramatic day in Melbourne. But after the break, we'll have the national weather forecast for you. Returning to our lead story now, and the tense situation in Melbourne outside of the headquarters of the CFMEU. That's where it started this morning. Riot police and the mounted unit are on standby, ready to move if protesters cause trouble. The union was targeted by a violent protest yesterday, but it claims very few of the protesters were actual members, blaming outside troublemakers for much of the violence. Overnight, the Andrews government announced a shock 2-week shutdown of the construction industry, and this is the result today. Hundreds of protesters storming the streets of Melbourne, heading towards State Parliament, police taking a zero-tolerance approach. So a very tense situation there on the streets of Melbourne. Let's have a look at the national weather now. A cold front is causing chilly conditions, strong winds and rain over Victoria, Tasmania and eastern New South Wales. The cold air will reach as far as southeast Queensland. A high is keeping conditions calm elsewhere. To the national capitals, windy and 25 degrees in Brisbane. Sydney, possible showers and 17. Canberra, partly cloudy, a top of 14 degrees. Melbourne, showers easing, just 13 degrees there today. Hobart, cloudy and 14. Adelaide, cloudy and 15. Perth, sunny and 27 today. And for Darwin, a sunny day ahead and 37 degrees. Well, for Melbourne viewers, the coverage of the protests will continue now with Mike Amor. Everyone else will keep you updated throughout the day. Our next major bulletin is at 4 p.m. I'm Ann Sanders. Thank you for your company. Have a good day.